Is it World War III again? In the words of my great TikTok friend, that Intel guy, who's been on the show. He's great. No, it's not World War III, but the world of World War One is back. There's another video on here who I unfortunately lost because I accidentally unbookmarked it. And it was this World War One historian who was talking about how many kind of similar parallels there were between the world of World War One, which we're talking 1900 to 1914 is when World War One starts, and the present day. Including issues in Russia and Eastern Europe, issues in the European continent, labor strikes, all this sort of thing. This all, kind of was all of these things were happening. And you had, going into World War I, you kind of had these great empires that had become fabulously wealthy, who had a lot of military. You had the reunification of Germany and Italy, which turned Germany into an economic and military powerhouse. Italy not so much, but that's another video. But you'd had big changes, and that all set up for the conflicts of World War One, and those had both caused some small wars. There was a Franco-Prussian War where Germany seized some territory from France that wanted to be German. There was a lot of going back and forth between Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, if Austria was going to be included in the new Germany, and they decided to exclude it. There was a lot of politicking and diplomacy going on in the late 19th century as these great nations, Germany unified for the first time since the Holy Roman Empire, and Italy unified for the first time probably since Napoleon. And so you'd had all these kind of big movements, and it really set up in World War One. There were lots of interests who were interested in fighting these competing empires. There was colonies to seize. There was land in Europe that people wanted. France wanted Alsace-Lorraine back. There was all these kind of competing territorial claims, and there was no superpower, no one overlighting body to kind of deal with any of this, and so it ended up being fought in the battlefields of World War One, which were absolutely brutal. Kills 5 million soldiers and many millions more civilians, and then many more beyond that dying of starvation, and completely resets the maps and borders of Europe and some of the rest of the world, and is the beginning of the end of the colonial empires. And not but 50 years later, most of them would be dead and or dying. And it is the World War One comparisons are a bit apt. The only real difference between our present geopolitical condition and World War One is the incentives aren't there. All the great empires, Britain, France, Germany was not unified, didn't really have an empire. They were trying to kind of make one out of what was left. They did some holdings in Africa and all this sort of thing, but that never really got off the ground. Italy tried to get land in Africa by seizing Ethiopia, and that didn't go very well. But for Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, the Ottomans, who'd been around for 800 years by that point, and it was beginning, the age was beginning to show, there was tremendous incentives, even among the Low Countries, Netherlands, Belgium, this sort of thing, to have this battle and these wars, and to seize this territory, and to kind of resolve some unresolved differences that had not really done anything since the Napoleonic Wars. And so you had all these different things that these people, wanted and were looking for. Germany was looking to seize land from anybody. France wanted Alsace-Lorraine back, sort of thing. So there was kind of all these different interests to get a hold of land, get a hold of wealth, and compete with these other great empires. And they were all about equal in power and military strength, although it would be the Allies, of course, that win with the assistance of the United States. And you also had this huge kind of military buildup as well. Our world lacks two things. One is the interest. There's really none of the great powers right now have a big incentive to go to war. The United States is tired after 20 years of forever wars. Russia is invading Ukraine, and it's not going that great. So much so the Ukrainians have invaded Russia. So it's not going that great. China economically is struggling post-pandemic. And Europe is kind of a mess coming out of the pandemic, and you don't really have a great military power in Europe. France does have some military power, so does the UK, but you do not have it. They're shadows of their former selves. Let's face it. And much of the rest of the world isn't even in the fight. Russia, I think, would like to do more than is in Ukraine, but they literally, for a postage stamp of land, have killed 500,000 people. So you don't really have these great incentives to go to war. Now, I think there are some nations that think that they have a nice incentive to go to war. Iran, obviously, but Iran's not a great power and is not looking to go up against a great power. They're looking to go up against Israel. Obviously, Israel is trying to wipe out Hamas as best they can at this point. There's a lot going on geopolitically, but it's usually small, dyad conflicts. It's not a great systemic conflict. The chances of war between any of the great powers, Russia, China, the United States, France, UK, is low. The only, I think the only kind of greater chance of some conflict right now would be between NATO as a bloc and Russia, possibly over Ukraine. But I think there are incentives on both sides for that conflict not to expand. I think there's even incentives for the Israel Hamas conflict not to expand with Iran. I think that's why President Biden has sent a lot of force into the Middle East right now. And unfortunately, here's the reality: is this is how conflict's going to be, and this was the world before World War One. It was, I mean, I just meant there was the Crimean War in the 1850s. You had the Franco-Prussian War as part of German unification. You had all these kind of small, low-level, nagging, niddling conflicts that didn't really affect anybody's life, but were still going on. That's the world we're now going to be living in. I think the reason why people feel like the world is crashing, the world is falling apart, is unlike the world of World War One, where you read about the war the next day in the newspaper, where the reports are weeks old because they had to come by boat. Because no one had yet crossed the Atlantic by plane. It'd come by boat. We're now getting it on our smartphone. It's in our pocket. I mean, there's a guy in Gaza that's going live every day on TikTok. It's even different than having Vietnam in your living room. We're very conscious of all of these conflicts going on all the time, like the situation in South Sudan, the situation with the Rohingya in Myanmar, the situation with the Uyghurs in China, the situation with China and the U.S. over Taiwan, and also because of social media, the peoples of these countries are talking and communicating more than ever before. And so we're talking about it, we're thinking about it, it's in our consciousness in a way that global conflict never really has before. And I think the reason why there are so many people being like, when is it going to be World War III? The world is falling apart, the world is burning, is simply because we are so much more conscious. But when you step back with geopolitical expertise and look at the situation, even US v China over Taiwan, I still think right now is relatively unlikely because Beijing realizes it's a losing proposition and it would undermine them economically. It is it's a difficult thing. So my advice would be no, World War III is not starting tomorrow. Take a break from social media, read a book, watch a TV show, step outside, talk to some friends, don't talk politics, and you will feel better about the world in that situation. So there are some parallels to the world of World War One, but we're really living in the world before World War One, with lots of low-level conflicts going on in different parts of the world, and us trying to get used to our new multipolar reality where Russia's going to have its own thing, China's going to have its own thing, Europe's going to be its own thing, we're going to be our own thing, and getting used to the environment where we're not locked into Cold War stasis like we were, or even the years of Pax Americana. We have to get used to a different reality, but I think the hardest part is it's in our phones. And that's what we have to get used to dealing with. So, like I said, relax, it'll be okay.